kinder and gentler nation.
I want to say again that our purpose here is to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe. I want to say again that our purpose here is to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe. I want to say again that our purpose here is to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe.
Since the conscience of the world has grieved for the slaughter in Rwanda.
U.S. President Bill Clinton is threatening the Yugoslav president with possible military action if he refuses to accept a Kosovo peace accord.
President Clinton is warning Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic of NATO airstrikes if he doesn't go along with the Kosovo peace agreement.
The president's national security team was quick to deliver a blunt message. Decision time for Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic.
And if Belgrade doesn't reverse course, the Serbs alone will be responsible for the consequences. And I would just like to remind President Milosevic that NATO stands ready to take whatever measures are necessary.
The American people need to have a better understanding what the United States national security interests are, if any.
I do not want to put a single American pilot into the air. I do not want anyone else to die in the Balkans. I do not want a conflict. Make no mistake, if we and our allies do not have the will to act, there will be more massacres. In dealing with aggressors in the Balkans, hesitation is a license to kill.
In Africa today, a plane carrying the presidents of two African nations has apparently been shot down as it was coming in for a landing in the capital of Rwanda. UN officials say that both presidents were killed. They're the leader of Rwanda, where a civil war formally ended a few months ago, and the leader of Burundi, where a civil war is still raging. There are no pictures from today, but we're told there's a bloodbath underway in Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. The acting prime minister has been murdered. Government soldiers and rebels are fighting house to house for control of the city.
The situation has been pretty nerve-wracking. In all neighborhoods there has been automatic fire, grenades. There's a good deal of selective house-to-house destruction and some killing going on. We are all worried.
The State Department admits the 255 Americans in Rwanda are trapped. For the moment, plans to get them out of this tiny Central African country are on hold. It is too dangerous. The killing has been horrendous. Lindsay Hilsum, a BBC reporter in Rwanda, describes piles of dead bodies and one horrible incident in Kigali, the capital.
Armed men, soldiers, went into this religious community. They spared the lives of two white fathers, Belgian Jesuits, but they locked up 6 or 7 Rwandan priests and 9 young Rwandan women training to be nuns and just killed them.
Good evening. Relief officials are reporting the fiercest fighting yet in the Central African nation of Rwanda, where tens of thousands of people have reportedly been killed in 3 days of tribal slaughter and renewed civil war.
All of the Americans who wanted to escape the tribal fighting have reached safety. ABC's Ron Allen talked to some of them today in Nairobi, Kenya.
They arrived in Nairobi with few possessions and countless horror stories of life in Kigali during the past few days. The constant gunfire, the massacres they'd witnessed, the hours they wondered whether they would make it out alive. So far, there is no plan for U.S. troops to join the peacekeeping operation in Rwanda. Murder and chaos swept through Rwanda's capital again today. These pictures show some of the most vicious scenes yet of the violence between the country's warring ethnic groups. Reports from the capital describe drunken men hacking their victims with knives and machetes.
The most dangerous places, he says, are the roadblocks, where government soldiers checking Rwandans fleeing the city also check identity cards. People from the wrong ethnic group have been executed on the spot by the soldiers.
NATO is giving Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic a final warning. Accept a Kosovo peace plan now or face massive bombing attacks.
Now, the Yugoslav foreign minister was talking about a plan that the Kosovo Albanians have already signed on to, and this is what it amounts to. Number one, that the plan would give Kosovo a great amount of self-government and autonomy, but keep it part of Serbia. Number two, that NATO peacekeepers, an international peacekeeping force, would replace the Yugoslav army and the Serbian special police, who are now on the offensive in Kosovo. And number three, after 3 years, an international meeting would take place on a final settlement for Kosovo.
White House officials insist NATO forces are now ready to pound Serb positions in and around Kosovo. The immediate objective, to reduce the Serbs' ability to attack the Kosovars. But there's a broader objective, to destroy important Serbian military targets, hoping that would eventually convince Mr. Milosevic to accept the settlement. The unstated objective, which would be to try to punish the Yugoslav military, the Yugoslav government, by hitting very valuable military targets, not only in Kosovo, but elsewhere in Serbia and Yugoslavia proper, designed to bring Slobodan Milosevic to the bargaining table to sign the agreement that was worked on in Paris. They don't state that openly.
I have just directed the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Clark, to initiate their operations in the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia.
I think if the American people don't know anything about me else, they know that I don't like to use military force. The dangers of acting must be weighed against the dangers of inaction.
The American people need to have a better understanding what the United States national security interests are, if any.
The bloodiest place in the world at the moment, however, remains the Central African country of Rwanda. With the president dead there, old tribal wars have broken out again, and people seem determined to fight until no one is left standing.
The violence has reached such an extreme here that Western forces have decided to pull out of Rwanda. Only a small group of United Nations peacekeepers will remain. There is fear among people here about what will happen now that the foreigners are withdrawing and leaving Rwandans to fight it out.
This man told Belgian soldiers, "We are trying to remain calm, but your decision to leave, this is bad."
In Central Africa, UN peacekeeping troops are starting to pull out of Rwanda, unable to end the fighting between rebels and government troops. Every day brings evidence of more massacres. In one of the latest, hundreds of refugees were pulled out of a former UN compound and slaughtered by government troops with grenades, machine guns, and machetes. They were killed because they belonged to the minority Tutsi tribe.
As horrendous as the number may be, the estimate of 100,000 people killed in Rwanda in just the last 3 weeks may be far too low. U.S. government sources say 2 or 3 times as many may have died, most from the minority Tutsi tribe that makes up 10% of Rwanda's 7 million people.
It is really appropriate to use the word genocide.
It is very difficult to compare one tragedy with another, but I would certainly say that the scale of the killings in the last 3 weeks is unparalleled in the world today.
Beyond intensifying diplomacy and sending emergency food, the Clinton administration says there is little the U.S. can do.
I'll be walking away from Haiti and Rwanda and Somalia, but where Caucasians in Europe are involved, we really feel a responsibility, an obligation. Is that the case?
What we can achieve is significant damage to Milosevic's military capability and therefore a curbing of his repression.
Why, they ask at funerals like this, does the West ignore their grief and threaten airstrikes, while KLA independence fighters who kill Serbs are applauded as partners in peace?
About 4 hours ago, NATO began massive air raids against Yugoslavia, making good its threat to punish President Slobodan Milosevic for waging war in Kosovo. The NATO air raids are expected to push thousands more refugees in Kosovo across the southern border into the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia.
Yugoslav television also showed pictures of what they claim was civilian casualties, and officials there say they have had at least 10 civilian casualties in the first night of bombing.
I want to say again that our purpose here is to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe.
With the savagery reaching unimaginable proportions now, the roads leading out of the little African country of Rwanda have become meandering rivers of humanity.
It's being called one of the largest and fastest exoduses ever. In just 24 hours, hundreds of thousands of exhausted and terrified Rwandan refugees flooded into Tanzania. Late last night, Secretary Boutros Ghali called on the UN Security Council, blasted by African nations for pulling thousands of peacekeepers from Rwanda last week. Deployment of an extensive force seems unlikely. The U.S. and most Western states seem more than resistant to risk any lives in a country where ethnic warfare is only likely to escalate.
The conscience of the world has grieved for the slaughter in Rwanda.
There it is, landlocked in the heart of East Africa. Zaire to the west, Uganda to the north, Kenya to the east, and Burundi and Tanzania to the south. It has no natural resources to speak of, no strategic value to the rest of the world. And just for good measure, it has been ravaged by AIDS. There is, in other words, not a single practical reason why the United States should become involved.
The Russian foreign minister, in a joint briefing with the Russian military chief of staff, said the goal of NATO's bombing campaign is to force on the world the political, military, and economic diktat of the U.S.
We begin with allegations of genocide committed against ethnic Albanians in Kosovo.
It is utterly offensive that he should be waging war against a whole ethnic identity, trying to recreate a new apartheid in Europe based on the cleansing, forcible removal, and execution of people of the wrong ethnic identity in his region.
United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees says since March 24th, the day the bombing began, 7,000 Kosovo Albanians have arrived in Macedonia, 20,000 in Montenegro, and 65,000 in Albania. The UN says another 90,000 are headed for Albania.
He has caused hundreds of thousands of people to be refugees.
But historians say the rage is rooted in ethnic rivalries that go back to the days when colonial rulers gave education, jobs, and power to the Tutsi minority, who tend to be tall, long-faced, and light-skinned. The Hutus, shorter and darker, were peasants and serfs. For months, Hutus in the government have waged a hate campaign against them in the media.
They spewed out the most incredibly virulent anti-Tutsi propaganda against Tutsi, but also against members of the political opposition. In this case, it was we have a mass grave here that's only half full? Who's going to help us fill it up before tomorrow morning? That kind of rhetoric.
And the killing goes on. On Sunday, at a Catholic mission in central Rwanda, 200 to 300 more bodies were discovered, including babies as young as 6 months old. And as rebel forces gain on government troops, the fear of such revenge has created this human sea of refugees. People of majority and minority ethnic groups alike desperate to escape, to get away from a slaughter whose sheer ferocity ranks among the worst this century has seen.
What can anybody do?
UN Secretary Boutros Ghali asked the Security Council for a new commitment of force. But after the bitter lesson of Somalia, American and European leaders are reluctant to commit any of their own troops.
I think the conscience of the world has grieved for the slaughter in Rwanda.
Now, Serbian television each day and through the night is showing endless amounts of civilian damage, not just in Kosovo and in Belgrade, but throughout Yugoslavia, and using these images to support their claims that the NATO attacks are causing far wider damage against civilian areas than NATO is prepared to admit.
With the Serb offensive in Kosovo now described by the White House as, quote, potential genocide, President Clinton is for the first time raising the possibility of a major change in U.S. policy on Kosovo independence.
We have very clear indicators that genocide is unfolding in Kosovo. We're looking at a mixture of confirmed and unconfirmed reports at this time, but we don't see any need to await confirmation of genocide.
We call it genocide. Politically motivated, but genocide, which will, if it continues, eventually lead to something close to the destruction of the Tutsi as a people.
Rwanda is a desperately poor, out-of-the-way place that has no oil or anything else of economic or strategic value. The question is a humanitarian one. Should the United States turn its back on such massive suffering when the rest of the world has shown so little interest in stopping it?
Relief agencies now are estimating that as many as 500,000 people may have been killed in the bloodshed in Central Africa, and those who escaped Rwanda are enduring a different kind of horror.
250,000 Rwandan refugees face disease and starvation, aid agencies warn. They're crammed into a large field and have nothing except terrible memories of a horror which seems to follow them. Bloated bodies from the massacres flow down the Kagera River into Tanzania by the thousands. Both tribal groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis, kill each other and throw the bodies into the river.
According to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, 9,000 Kosovar Albanians have entered the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia since March the 24th. Another 20,000 are now in the Yugoslav province of Montenegro. But the vast majority, some 65,000, have crossed into Albania.
With new arrivals increasing by the day, the international aid community says it has big plans to cater for these refugees.
I'm deeply sad because of tragedy, people of Kosovo, Albanians and Serbs and all the others. This tragedy is a result of NATO aggression. We had not humanitarian disaster before airstrikes. Now we have many people dead in ethnic clashes in Kosovo and by NATO bombs and missiles all over my country.
By a deliberate policy, he has caused hundreds of thousands of people to be refugees.
As investigators try to make sense of the killing, there is more evidence Rwanda's massacres may be a premeditated political act, not a spontaneous eruption of ethnic hatred. Those responsible, human rights investigators say, are Hutu extremists within Rwanda's government trying to grab more power.
These killings were intended to wipe out opposition from whatever quarter it came from, political or ethnic group, once and for all. It really was intended as the final solution. This thing was very carefully planned, was very well planned, well in advance. There is absolutely nothing spontaneous about it.
Forces are on the outskirts of the capital, pounding it with heavy artillery. Observers say the government may be on the verge of falling. If and when it does, it will leave behind a legacy of genocide, the worst since the killing fields of Cambodia 20 years ago. UN Secretary General Boutros Ghali last week called on the Security Council to mount an intervention force, but so far, not one single nation has agreed to take part.
The UN commander concedes his men are in danger. He is asking for more troops, but it will be hard to find countries prepared to commit their men to the Rwandan quagmire.
Rwanda is a desperately poor, out-of-the-way place that has no oil or anything else of economic or strategic value.
Question: is the enemy of an enemy an ally? In the case of the United States and the Kosovo Liberation Army, KLA fighters are the only ones battling Yugoslav ground forces. But the same KLA some Washington lawmakers want to arm has also been branded as a terrorist organization.
We are tremendously disturbed and also condemn very strongly the unacceptable violence done by terrorist groups in Kosovo, and particularly the UCK, the Kosovo Liberation Army. This is, without any question, a terrorist group.
There's no doubt that some members of the KLA have been involved in committing atrocities of their own and have engaged in ethnic cleansing.
With no end to the fighting near, millions of men, women, and children continue to race from their homes to escape the bloodshed. Already, the massacres have killed an estimated 500,000 people, twice the initial number.
And genocide has been carried out in this country almost with impunity. And when it is near to completion, people talk about intervention.
Overseas now, in Rwanda, the United States has forced the delay of a UN peacekeeping mission to Rwanda, saying that more planning is needed.
I think the conscience of the world has grieved for the slaughter in Rwanda.
Effects of the war are spreading across Africa. Authorities in Uganda say so many corpses are floating in Lake Victoria, it's become a disaster area. 500,000 have now died. And life or death is still the casual decision of ill-trained soldiers, themselves, sometimes only children. The outside world watches in shock. The UN tries to stop the fighting. Relief agencies battle to save as many as they can, and still, there is no end in sight. Barry Peterson.
Bill Clinton is the nation's first baby boomer president, a man with no military background. That and the fact NATO forces are so far failing to stop ethnic cleansing and killing may be the reasons there are more critics of the president than usual. Bill Clinton is the nation's first baby boomer president, a man with no military background. That and the fact NATO forces are so far failing to stop ethnic cleansing and killing may be the reasons there are more critics of the president than usual in time of war.
If he does not commit ground troops and does not win this war, he will have presided over the third genocide on his watch after Bosnia and Rwanda, and he will have lost the war.
What we've had is a political bombing, not a military bombing. What we've had is a political bombing, not a military bombing.
Rwanda, there are so many refugees trying to flee the civil war on foot that the column stretches for 20 miles outside the capital, Kigali. It has been a week since the United Nations Security Council approved a new peacekeeping force for Rwanda. No country has volunteered forces, and the Secretary General thinks it's a crime. ABC's Richard Gisbert.
After watching the nightmare of Rwanda for nearly 2 months, the world's senior diplomat called it genocide and blamed himself, his organization, and the world community.
I failed
It is a scandal. It is a failure not only for the United Nations, but it is a failure for the international community.
Amid reports of civilian massacres and 1 million refugees, the Security Council has approved an additional peacekeeping force of 5,500. But no troops have gone yet. Member countries have been slow to volunteer soldiers, and the U.S. cannot agree with the UN on the force's mandate. The U.S. cannot agree with the UN on the force's mandate.
I'm sorry, so sorry that I was such a fool. I didn't know love could be so cruel. Oh, yes. You tell me are part of being young, but I don't right the wrong that's been done. I'm sorry, so sorry. Please accept my apology, but love is blind, and I was too blind to see. Oh, yes. You tell me mistakes are part of being young, but I don't right the wrong that's been done. Oh, yes. I'm sorry, so sorry.